You're listening to Live Wild Radio, the part-time adventure podcast.
Join us as we explore how outdoor adventures build mind, body, and spirit. I'm Catherine.
I'm Winston.
We're Live Wild Radio, and tonight we have a special episode that we all quite care about in our very own unique way. This is February. This is also known to some as Mental Health Month, and we want to talk about that tonight.
Yeah, because everybody's broken.
In one way or another.
That's right.
That's how musicians make their money.
That's right.
And comedians.
That's true.
So the impetus for this episode came in of, when we met Alyssa, big part of what she's doing is trying to destigmatize and mental health issues and give people tools, in a sense, of help them, deal with it. And I've dealt with depression most of my life. I don't know whether it's the healthiest way to look at it, but I just sort of look at it as it's part of the machine, and sometimes the machine malfunctions.
It's the controller of the machine.
Yeah. It's like, but unlike, when your shitty Windows computer doesn't work, the IT department regularly just says, turn it off and turn it back on again, which I guess in a weird way is what sleep is, isn't it?
If you sleep well, sure.
Yeah. Because sometimes I could go to bed very, despondent. Mm-hmm. Like, none of the world makes sense. And I wake up in the morning and it's like, I don't know what the big deal was.
And you can have the reverse with lack of sleep, for sure.
Absolutely.
Like, at least for me, anxiety is the primary thing I deal with, although for sure depression as well. It's a close cousin. But I could be feeling great, have a bad sleep, and my anxiety is through the roof the next day for no good reason.
Well,
other than that.
There is a good reason.
Yeah, true.
And
Well, you could be having anxiety that you didn't get enough sleep the night before.
Yeah, that's true too.
Or you can have anxiety about sleeping and not get to sleep.
Yep.
Which I'm, as somebody who's been an insomniac for a long time, and it's funny, like one of my things that I ran into for a long time now what I do is to shut my brain off. I read, and I end up half the time waking up in the morning with my face with drool glued to a page, the light's still on. But there was like almost this anxiety that if I fell asleep, then I would have to deal with tomorrow sooner.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right.
Sure. Yep.
So then I ended up having a hard time sleeping, and then because you're sleep deprived, that has both physically and mentally negative health consequences.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, and you're just you basically end up this sort of spiraling almost down the drain.
Yeah, you really need to deal with whatever you're struggling with internally. If it's like, in my case, I've struggled with anxiety and also rebuilding my life after a 18-year relationship, and now what the fuck, right? But the other anxiety I dealt with was in terms of my job stability, because my organization was completely defunded, and I was the only person that was asked to stay on, which still had its struggles. But my point is that a lot of the times it can be internal. In my case, I think it is a bit of the environment of what's happening in my life, but how you look at the world. Mm-hmm. So if you never resolve that, you're going to have difficulty sleeping. You're going to have difficulty managing your anxiety because a lot of it's internally driven. That's what I've experienced in my case.
Yeah, and I think basically before we started to record the episode, we talked a little bit. Mental health, just like general health, is something that everybody deals with and should be concerned with, mm-hmm. right? And then there's when it moves, I guess if you want to call it, beyond sort of just your day-to-day, just good habits that lead to better outcomes. And then there's the mental health or mental illness aspect where just like, we try to maintain good health so we don't get ill, mm-hmm. right? I think it's the same thing with the mental state, because for myself, one of the ways that I manage my depression is to do all of the things that give me the best chance to stave off or manage the effects. Right, because it never completely goes away, mm-hmm. regardless of how skilled you get at it. So, if hopefully we can get people thinking about the idea that if you treat your mental health like you would your physical health, you can't do shitty things to yourself and then expect to never have problems. Just as you can't eat shit food and not exercise and expect your body to be operating at 100%. And really, in a sense, because your brain is part of your body, they're kind of connected. Like, that's some of the things we're going to talk about.
They're completely connected. Yeah, things going on with your body, whether it's food, sleep, exercise, completely affects your brain, and vice versa. And I know there's more you want to talk about that later.
Yeah.
But I find too, Ben Greenfield talks about in his new book that he tries to get everybody's mental state in check first, because that's a big part of your motivation to go and exercise and challenge yourself and do more, right? Well, if you don't even have the energy, motivation, you can't handle the normal easy stresses of life. How the fuck are you going to get into the gym and take care of yourself and self-care?
100%.
So I think it's probably one of the most important things that people there isn't a strong awareness as there is even for, like, everybody agrees you should be exercising, but people don't talk more about the importance of just general, not only dealing with mental illness, but mental health. Yeah.
Well, because I think, at least in my case, and we're not professionals here. This is just, I'm an experienced layperson on one subject. Like, when I'm in a subject, I'm not talking about like topic, but I mean one person, right? My own. And there's a case where some people will run into the thing where they do need medical intervention because, like, literally just like a diabetic isn't producing insulin. They may run into a thing where they medications will help. Personally, when I've been on medications, like antidepressants, it was one of those things, like it removes your personality, or I felt it did. Like, we never found that sort of perfect combination. So I always worked into the thing of more behavioral therapy and learning coping mechanisms or management mechanisms. But I was lucky enough not to be in a point where my body had kind of betrayed me to the point where there was no other option.
Okay.
So I could, with the help of, my therapists and things, and a lot of research too. Like, I would find there'd be foods I would eat. And then I would go, like, spiral out.
What kind of food? Yeah.
A lot of, like, certain fast foods. Like,
Okay.
Luckily I'm not, like, one of these people that's allergic to everything. But, and I don't know whether it's an allergy or not, but, and this will be something that I find kind of fascinating, like the research that's happening now on how your gut biome, like how your digestive system works, affects your mental health. Like, so the certain, say, carbohydrates, like pure sugar, unless I'm doing a ton of exercise,
To burn it off.
that it's burning as I'm eating it, tends to create like a negative reaction. Like I see my mood go down. Like if I have, and that's why I avoid candy around the holidays. It's around everywhere. Because if I'm not physically doing something, so I'm burning it off, there seems to be some sort of reaction, and then, a couple hours later, my mood is way down. And part of it is blood sugar levels and everything. Mm-hmm. But it's not that I have no energy. It's that my mood has changed, right? Like my view of the world, So yeah, like there's a lot. Like in the one hand, I find it fascinating because the fact that our behaviors, whether it's food, exercise, there's all this stuff we don't quite understand. right? So anything that we don't understand, to me, is like a fertile ground for study. And that part of me basically almost gets excited because, and I think that's one of the big things that a lot of people run into is that we kind of look at our physical health and mental health, because they're connected, as separate from what we eat. Like, yeah, I know for like, I shouldn't eat a lot of hamburgers, or fast food and fried food because it's bad for my heart. Mm-hmm. But it's bad for your head too, right? Because your brain is just another organ.
But
right?
It might, in the moment, make you feel a lot better.
Oh, well, that's the dopamine.
Right. So
Yeah,
there's
I
the
was
whole...
just thinking it's interesting how those foods tend to be what we think of as comfort foods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is instant gratification, making you feel better in the moment. But in the long term is not necessarily going to help your mental
Well,
health.
yeah, and even in the medium term, right? Like there's that I forget what basically high fat, high sugar foods tend to, I think they like, you get the dopamine kick in like 7 seconds. So it actually hits you quicker than like heroin does. And so what we run into is because, dopamine being the reward,
Receptor or whatever.
yeah,
it is.
like we run into the thing that the things, whether it's, drugs and essentially food is a drug at that point, or activity, something that gives us that reward, right? Because I think we got the dopamine when we didn't die in caveman times, right? It's kind of that reward. It's like, ooh, Oog did good.
Survive that lion attack.
Yeah, right. So so the behaviors that are, beneficial to us, and probably part of the reason, like if you get that kick from overeating, right? That dopamine kick. Well, when food was sparse, overeating, getting that reward, like brain reward, then would have you, oh, I want that again. So then you're going to go for more food. Well, now that food is absolutely plentiful, then it's almost like our evolutionary biology is betraying us.
Yeah, we still want that same reward.
Yeah.
See, I think sugar in 20 years, maybe even less, 15, is going to be like the new shameful thing to eat. Or
Yeah, I mean, it's
behavior.
definitely already starting.
Almost like cigarettes, smoking, Yes.
Result?
Yeah, the lack
Like
of activity, the overeating, and the choice of food. I think those things should be shamed.
But that means banning the buffet. But after getting out of the trail
It's a
for
shift
like
that has to happen, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
No, it's not healthy. It's not.
I guess I will be willing for the greater good. I will lament and mourn the passing of the buffet. Because like when you're on a big hike and you're done, like I'll just say this right now. So long, Asian buffet in Saranac Lake, New York.
Really?
Well, no, we're gonna go, but I mean, just it's just if the societal benefit comes from like shaming buffets and they have to go, I will mourn their loss, right? With the soft serve ice cream and all those things, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice.
Although maybe the buffet will become the reward for the hiking expeditions that you go on.
Oh no, that's
what might
it. But
the
that's
shift
what I
might
mean.
be.
That's the only way we use it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, if we go there, now we usually go at lunch because it's only $8 for everything you can eat. But one of the biggest things we'll run into there, sometimes there are people in there who didn't earn it from a hiking trip, right? So I think that's the thing where we might have to be willing to give that up for the benefit of those people. That's all I'm saying.
Just looking at it from a more, not so much, at least when I was on the keto diet, that's when I fully appreciated the value of nutrition and how your brain functions. Because without certain minerals and vitamins,
You're dumb.
yeah. Yeah, I need to shove like a granola bar down my throat when we're going to go rock climbing, right? Yeah. So that was really powerful for me. Gave me a whole new appreciation on how our body systems and our brain function is connected to food.
Yeah, because that's one of the things you'll run into. Whether it's a keto diet, whether it's trying low carb diets, whether it's cutting out, processed sugar out of your diet, there's sort of various things you can play with, right? Because if you think about almost any diet, they're all some type of elimination diet, right? Because they're all about reducing something, Now, the paleo diet, right? Like no processed foods. And one of those things you're constantly hearing from people when they sort of get it figured out is like, my mental clarity is my focus and my brain, and right, because and it really does show you how food, the fuel we give our body and the building blocks we give our body affect how our brain works. Yeah.
Even how addicted. I had no realization until I started the keto diet of how addicted I was to sugar, because when I stopped, and then there was like all these treats in front of me, the things that I would normally closet eat and stuff down my throat and take 5 of those when nobody's looking. I'm in the kitchen and you're watching TV. It was really bad. And all of a sudden on the keto diet, nothing. No cravings. And even with coffee, I always put sugar. Like ever since I was a kid, I'd put like 7 spoonfuls of sugar in my cereal. Oh my gosh. And it was even better when you put it in your Shreddies and put it in the fridge and let it just sog there.
Okay, this is a bit extreme.
Let it ferment. Anyways, that's an aside. But seriously, I loved sugar all my life. And all of a sudden, and then more recently, I think you've noticed my energy levels being low, and especially on the trip to Vegas a couple years ago or in Utah. I remember I was having trouble driving. It was really strange after I think I had carbs. I was trying to follow that. Anyways, long story short, I've noticed an improvement eliminating carbs and sugar from my diet. So long as you get your vitamins in order, right? So I take B12, and that's really important for me. But there's a far better benefit from mental clarity. But I would say just controlling your urges, and we all know sugar's not great. So it's really interesting. Yeah,
because basically, do you find like the foods you eat, you have like semi-immediate like change in mental outlook?
Not for me personally, but that may be specific to the fact that I typically deal with anxiety, and anxiety makes it difficult for me to eat. So I don't think I have quite the same relationship. I mean, certainly I can relate to, eating a bunch of sugar and how you feel different. But yeah, for me, I mean, like my biggest struggle when it comes to mood and food is getting in the cycle of being so anxious, it's difficult to eat, and I'm not even hungry, but also knowing that perpetuates not feeling good.
Yeah.
So you're trying to get yourself to eat food. But yeah, for me, it plays out in it not being able to eat, period.
Oh, sometimes I kind of wish I had that problem.
I hear ya. Yeah.
What about hydration? How does that affect anybody's mental clarity? Because I do find that I don't drink nearly enough, and I should try to up my water intake. But have any of you struggled with?
Not on an ongoing basis.
Well,
but
certainly when you're hiking, dehydration, right?
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, because I tend to, on a daily basis, I'm the minimum of a gallon a day guy, which is why I was running in the door to pee when we got here. Because I'd already, like at work today, I drank 3 liters throughout the day, and I drank a liter before I went to work, and then when I got in the car, Catherine had a large coffee for me.
So you were literally the exact opposite of me. I'd be lucky if I drank a liter a day.
Yeah. But for me, a lot of that came in from the standpoint of, for a lot of my life, I was an endurance athlete, like competitively. And you see a huge, like if you're dehydrated, you see this huge drop off in performance. So then you just hydrate, electrolytes and hydration, and it's sort of almost this mantra, because in competition, I've had a number of times, and even like a couple of years ago on a backpacking trip. It was hot summer, and I wasn't stopping and drinking enough, and got severely dehydrated, like literally to the point where like dizzy and turning pale, because I just sweat buckets in the heat.
Or you just can't function. Your brain's not processing.
Well, and that's the
You've
thing.
seen
It's
that too.
Like literally.
I feel like I'm having that sort of a mild type of reaction to that by not drinking enough, just in general.
Yeah. Well, because if you think about the fact that your brain is mostly made up of water,
Yeah.
it's a sponge. So if you can't expect a sponge to be live and vibrant if it's kind of dried out. So that and quite honestly though, like that bringing that up, I've experienced being stupid because of like dangerous levels of dehydration. But I've never actually seen any study on that. Like maybe a chronic dehydration, like low level. I wonder if there actually is an effect there, or not so much an effect, but something that's actually been studied.
I think there's a chain reaction, right? If you don't have enough liquids, well, what's your bowel, system going to be like? How often are you going? And just in terms of your body functioning correctly.
Yeah.
And then how you feel.
But why wouldn't I feel thirsty if my body wants me to drink?
That's a good point.
That's where I'm struggling with that concept.
Yeah, like because if you're not running into the thing of being like having it impede your performance, then it may not be an issue, And it depends, like there's how much water you drink, but also like how much tea or coffee. They're all fluids.
Yeah.
What's in your food?
What's your humidity level of your environment?
Yeah, like how much fruit and vegetables, because they've got a lot of water in them. So there's basically, I think it'd be one of those things where, if you were thirsty all the time and weren't drinking, but it'd be interesting to see, like, if we could also run into the thing, because that's just sort of like a process thing in the brain, right? To tell you you're thirsty. I wonder if like that feedback loop can get fucked up.
I think it can. I think when people are severely dehydrated, they don't even want water. And it's just some weird malfunctioning you're having at that point.
Yeah.
I'm sure your body can adapt to having less water than the recommended amount.
Yeah.
So vice versa, more water.
Yeah, because there's the thing of like survival versus optimal. Right? Yeah, that's going to be a cool one to research now.
Well, what I did when I was on that diet, the keto diet, is I actually got my blood panels taken just to make sure, because I was struggling, and then I was better, but I wasn't sure if I was completely good. So they looked at all the nutrients in your body, and are they at the right levels? So I think that's always worthwhile doing, just to make sure that your current habits are in check for optimal nutrition, nutrients, and vitamins.
Yeah. Because like if you take certain things like vitamin B6, if you don't have adequate supplies, your brain can't make serotonin and dopamine. So and then those neurotransmitters are actually made from tryptophan, which then gets turned into 5-HTP, which then gets turned into serotonin. And then I think it's tyrosine, the amino acid, which then gets turned into dopamine with vitamin B6. So if these levels are low, then you may run into that thing where your body just doesn't have enough building blocks to make these pieces.
Yeah, vitamin B12 is another one to help combat anxiety and stress, because I remembered mine were over the recommended levels, and my doctor said, don't worry about that. That's actually good. That's not an issue. So that's another good one that significantly helped me with energy and mental processing. But she had mentioned also anxiety and stress. It's good for that.
So yeah, let's go around the table now, because we've talked a little bit about sort of the not giving anybody diet recommendations, because we're not, but sort of our own experiences with food. And with any of these things, like basically, regardless of what podcast you listen to, even if we were like 4 world-renowned experts, which we're not, one of the things I encourage people to do is research. Like if you're like, especially because the world is at our fingertips now as far as information goes. Yeah. Don't just take, oh, that person said, so that's what I'm going to add in. You know, the only thing with this, I want you to take away from it is that your mental state, your mental health, in addition to a ton of other factors, is affected by what you eat. So do some research, right? Like I know food allergies, like especially low grade ones. So it's not like you shit your pants when you have milk because you're lactose intolerant. It's not like it causes you pain, but certain foods, if your body doesn't process them well, right, can increase inflammation,
and anxiety as well. I know somebody at work, she has a food allergy, and she has an allergy to gluten, but then she got diagnosed. She has other food allergies because she was experiencing incredible anxiety and stress, and that significantly helped her changing her diet.
Well, and one of the interesting things too, and I don't know if you've read any of this, but how your gut biome health, they say that your gut is basically so intricately lined up with sort of how your brain functions. It's like your second brain or something like that.
Yep.
And that the flora and fauna in your digestive system, what strains they are, can have an impact on your mental health.
That's interesting.
And that they're working on, like, basically experimenting with different probiotics, and it actually can change somebody's, like, the way they think and the way they, so that, I'm no expert. I've just read a bunch of shit on it. So read up on that because it's not something that people like give enough thought to, right? Like we're mostly parasites, right? We have bacteria on our skin. Like we could not digest food without the bacteria in our gut.
Yeah, we're made up of more bacteria than we are human cells, I think they say.
Yeah. And so basically there's sort of this symbiotic relationship going on that we have a play in, obviously going to adjust, but it comes in where if the bacteria you've got, whatever mix that is, isn't your friend, how much is that going to affect the way your brain works, right? And therefore how you see the world and how you feel, and, so that's something for people to look into as far as, that good health. For anybody like who listens to podcasts or what have you, regardless of what people feel about him politically, like Jordan Peterson and his daughter both had autoimmune issues, and they both had like depression and anxiety and all of these like really, really severe, and they went to the carnivore diet, which is basically nothing but red meat and water. And the feedback from both of them is like, I can't believe it, right? And the daughter, Michaela, is periodically experimented with adding other foods back in, and she would be go into like a super dark depression for a month, eating bananas or kale or whatever she's added in, so really sort of a stark example of how food can dramatically affect somebody's both physical health, joints and arthritis and all that kind of stuff, but also, their mental state. I'm not advocating the carnivore diet, but just to give, an idea of how big of an effect it can have. And the other thing, because I was just reading this today, anybody is looking for good fitnessy training information of a scholarly bent, particularly about getting physically stronger, Greg Nuckols, and that is the coolest name, Greg Nuckols. He's got a website called Stronger by Science, And I was reading about creatine monohydrate, the most studied, health food supplement out there that actually does something. And there's actually a lot of information, like studies about it, both reducing inflammation and basically you can have inflammation in your brain too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And because it increases the level of creatine phosphate in the system, which turns into ATP, and because the brain is the most active energy consumer in the body, and ATP is on a molecular level what every cell uses for fuel, by increasing the ATP levels in the brain, and some magic stuff, read the studies, that you run into the thing of better clarity. It's been linked to a decrease in depression. And it's somebody who's, used it a number of times throughout my life, because it's a relatively inexpensive supplement as well. It's really quite fascinating that something that you take to get big and jacked turns out to actually improve brain function, help it might stave off deteriorating mental faculties. So I thought that was kind of fascinating.
We should link to that in the show notes.
Yeah,
I'll find the B12 information, how it's good for anxiety and stress.
Yeah.
But I did hear on Ben Greenfield. So Ben Greenfield has a podcast. He's an athletic coach. Crazy. He helps a lot of people do like triple X Ironman competitions. I'm just throwing it out there. Like he's that kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he shines blue light on his balls every day.
I was just going to say that. He basically tests on himself. He's extreme. But he's very big on data and science, and he has a lot of guests on air, doctors, talking about the latest in biohacking. And he looks at it from mental, everything, performance, physical. And he had a guest on about the inflammation of the brain, how it's a thing. Unfortunately, I can't remember the details, but it was basically... very much linked to stress and anxiety, and this idea of a reptilian brain and us being a constant fight or flight is terrible for you. You were never meant to endure that, but the kind of lifestyle we lead with hectic lifestyles, multitasking.
We don't actually fight any tigers.
We don't.
But because it's supposed to be an on-off thing.
That's right. That's exactly it.
And instead, we've taken, it's like a shitty tap that won't stop dripping.
Yeah.
And it just goes all the time.
Your body can't sustain that.
Yeah.
So
Joe Rogan's flotation tank.
have you guys ever tried that?
No.
I am
Isolation
trying
tank?
it in a couple weeks.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, do that with a pot brownie and you've reset everything. It might be they find you just curled up in a ball in the corner of the tank. Let me out! I can't. I'm just saying. But that's another thing that actually I find kind of fascinating is the research they're doing with psychedelics.
Oh, yeah.
To reset like people with depression and anxiety.
PTSD.
Well, they're using Molly or MDMA.
Yep.
Like all of the fun drugs turn out to be like used appropriately good for you. Man, what an exciting time to live. Like all the stuff I did when I was younger. And by younger, I mean, like last year. Like it's legal. Like you can buy edibles here in Canada now.
Yep.
Right? And you can buy them in Las Vegas from the fine connoisseur people at the fine store who can tell you, which they recommend and why.
They're weed snobs.
Yeah. But it turns out some of those things can, probably not unsupervised, but can potentially have some therapeutic, not just fun benefits.
That, and I think to build on that, beyond just researching, I mean, there's something about just experimenting and seeing what works for you, whether it's diet or certain activities, and paying attention. How do I feel before? How do I feel after? I mean, for me, my struggles with especially anxiety in the last year even tracking things like how often am I getting outside? How often am I exercising? How often am I engaging in the self-care that matters to me? And you kind of, if you're not recording it and you're not really thinking about how you feel before and after, you don't notice, you don't remember. But I can clearly see if I'm starting to see my mood going down, I look, have I been going outside? Have I been exercising? For me, I like meditating. Have I been doing that? Like, what have I been doing in my life? And you usually see a pretty clear link that you've fallen off track on your kind of healthy behaviors in some way. So, I mean, also just experimenting and seeing what works for you, what doesn't.
Yeah. It's very personalized.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you're going to run into is that there's certain general things. This is things that work for me, and based on all of the research, generally don't hurt for people. Both some form of aerobic and strength training, because of the different pathways they work on. Enough sleep. When I like a lot of the research or studies I've seen, like the average adult, like working adult in North America is like averaging something like 6 or 6.5 hours of sleep a night.
I was doing that for a long time, sometimes 3 to 4 in 1 month.
You know, basically that's just, you're
dying. That's what you're doing. You're just killing yourself.
One night of inadequate sleep. The next day, your blood markers show that of a pre-diabetic. That's one night, right? There's a reason why, you know, down in them there Guantanamo Bays and those CIA black sites, one of the ways that they, you know, get the guests, we'll talk, to soften up to talk is sleep deprivation. Right? Like literally not letting people get enough sleep is torture.
So why does the mind work against us like that? To prevent us from getting the sleep that we need?
Well, I think there's probably two things there. Number one, a lot of times we're just shitty at our own time management because we're not tied to we fucked with our circadian rhythms. Right? Dark, we're in a room that's like
well lit.
Yeah, and it's after dark, right? Like for a lot of people, it used to be you were tied to the rise and fall of the sun. So obviously we've totally circumvented that. And then, you know, it's one of those things where we almost have to get ourselves into like go, okay, I'm going to go to bed, right? Because I've had like last night, you know, I'm tired. And, you know, went to bed at 11 o'clock. And that was after going to my company Christmas party. Right? We didn't stay up late, and we didn't, you know, because I was just tired. But most nights for me, I have to, unless I've done things, because we went climbing yesterday and we were up late the night before, like I literally have to go to bed.
Yeah.
Right? And start that process of like down-regulating your system. Right, because there's nothing sort of naturally making that happen, right? So, you know, if you don't specifically feel tired, unless you have almost like a ritual that sort of sets up your sleep.
And it works because I get 6 hours sleep for many years. And even on the weekends and the holidays, or although you'd have to be a few days into the holidays until you start to get more normal sleep patterns. But anyways, I'd wake up at 6 a.m. on the dot. Didn't even need my alarm clock. And I could go to bed at midnight. But guess what? I'd be up again, or 1 o'clock in the morning, or 2, 6 o'clock. It was no longer 6 hours. It was that time for some reason. It was really weird. And then I fell into this terrible path of 3-4 hours of sleep that happened, and that was very because of work and stress. I got pneumonia twice in 2 months, right?
Wow.
And that's when I really started to realize this has got to stop. This is killing me. Like this is really bad, and nobody cares. They really don't. So you got to take care of yourself. I literally had to start sleep training. I actually called it that. I started telling myself mentally, I need to sleep 7 hours a night. And it was hard because I would take my cell phone to bed. That's another thing. That's really bad for you.
Oh, yeah.
The blue light, right? I found the nights that I actually said to myself, I need to go to sleep now. And I want to get up at this time, even on the weekends. It worked. I don't know what it was. What is it subconsciously? Just speaking to yourself and talking to that piece of, the part of your mind. And actually, it also worked when I had very little sleep. I'm like, fuck, I got 4 hours. Okay, please, God. I was actually praying, like, please, God. And I'm not religious, but I really need to call in a favor right now. I need to be in good working order for tomorrow. And it would work. Isn't that so? It just shows how powerful the mind is, right? You can only do that so much.
Yeah, because you can only cheat.
Exactly.
Every now and again, you can get away with it.
But my point is, that's what I needed to do to extend my sleeping habit, right? Past 6 hours or past 6 a.m. or whatever. And so I think now I average about 7 to 8. So I'm still working towards 8, but it's kind of neat.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I would encourage anybody to, because obviously adequate sleep and adequate sort of mental downtime too, like a couple of things that can actually help with your sleep. Number one, electronics get shut off an hour before bed. Right? Like it's developing sort of, it's like everything. You got to ritualize your life, right? If you, making things into habits versus having to remember, at a certain point you forget, right? So it's just getting into this habit. And so that, if you've made something, okay, it's this time, so the phone goes down,
candlelight comes on.
Yeah.
That's something we've actually been trying to do.
Oh, incense. Hey, I had 5 hours of hard labor with nothing on incense. Nobody believed that my son was coming. So,
really?
Oh, yeah. I took hypnobirthing.
Whoa.
I did. Nobody believed me because I was so zen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but incense does it for me. Now it gets me in the mood.
So it was a relaxant for you, essentially?
Yeah. So my first baby was 30 hours of labor. So, and I was always scared of that whole process. And I think that's partly the reason why it took so long. So with my second child, I decided to take hypnotherapy for hypnobirthing. And whatever relaxes you. For me, incense does it. And it gave me the only time that I was allowed in my marriage at the time to burn incense because he hated it, my husband. So, yeah, for me, it's incredibly relaxing. And partly, it's probably because I used to go to yoga very often. Like I was going consistently for 2.5 years, 3 days a week. And there was an ashram in Montreal that I would go to. And there was a certain kind of incense that I really liked.
So you're associating it with that environment.
I think so. Yeah.
I could totally
so it was
see
very
that.
calming for me.
It's kind of that Pavlovian thing.
Yeah. And actually, when I used to work at your cycle shop and you gave me something really hard, I got into exactly. And they got into that mindset of calm and breathing. And I never breathed through my my mouth. It was always through my nose. And that's actually relaxing. Long story short is even in labor, you want to get into that meditation state.
For sure.
And you will forget time. You will literally go through like, I don't know how many minutes, or you'll think the intensity of the contraction should be a minute. It's like, it feels like it goes by quickly, like 10 seconds and like it's over. So what you can really do a lot with your mind to disassociate and get into a different calming state, and it works. So for me, going back to my level of anxiety and where that stemmed from, it was a lot of how I looked at the world. And that's why I think the exercise, back to your point on that, is so good for you. It helps you reset, clears all that shit. You're focusing on something else. You get the dopamine, from that, whatever else you get from it. You feel good. You're like, what was I upset about? Like your reaction to the world is different, And for me, having to rebuild my life, like, who the fuck am I? What do I want? I'm on dating apps saying I like to play baseball and volleyball. I don't do that. And, like, who am I? For me, going into the forest was a place of just therapy. And I think that to get away from whatever shit's, I think it's mostly caused by you, whatever shit's in your mind. You got to figure out the source of that. But it's hard to even get there when your mind is just spinning.
When I think that you make an interesting, or like a good point, because one of the things you run into is because our limbic system isn't terribly well evolved, it doesn't go, oh, this thing I'm stressed about isn't real, so I'm not. No, it's like basically the stress of getting chased by a tiger and the how am I going to meet that deadline?
The reptilian brain they talk about, yeah.
Yeah, your brain, like basically as far as the chemicals go and the fight or flight response are the same, right? So when you suffer from anxiety or you're experiencing anxiety, your body only has one way of processing, which is, okay, well, here you go.
Amp it up. You can't handle that, yeah.
And so basically part of the reason why exercise is so good, because you literally are, depending on how you exercise, I equate it as lifting weights is the fight part, or when I did martial arts a lot, that was the fight part, or when you're doing cardio, that's the flight part. And you literally are burning it off, right? Like the chemicals in your brain, right, that say, hey, you have to do a thing, right? Just as your brain's stupid and it responds with the same chemicals as you getting chased by a bear.
Yeah.
The physical activity that you're doing, that effectively, and this is sort of more of an analogy than that uses them up, is kind of tricking your brain that you either ran or you fought.
I can relate to that. I was going through a tremendous amount of stress as I was in this new organization, right? And just finding my spot and just adapting, right? Because I had to pivot significantly. And I'd wake up in the morning thinking I had to like fight through a battle. Like it was just terrible. I was so anxious. I was just, oh my God, it was the worst. And I'd go for a hike. I don't know what caused me to go for a hike. I just did. And I was listening to some Buddhism podcasts, and it's not even about the religion. I don't even think it's religion, or it was more about just and often the guy who was talking, he was funny, but it was just a change in fucking perspective on life, I don't know if it was the fresh air, the exercise, like you just mentioned, and coupled with just a different perspective, a different lens.
Well, sometimes I think even change of environment. Right, because we are creatures of habit, so just even putting yourself in a different environment breaks the habit.
Yeah.
Right? Now you have to pay attention to something different, and now the parts of your brain that were all obsessed.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. I totally was for a long, maybe like 2 years of being obsessed. I was really tense and anxious, and it was. You
mean like how you rock climb?
Over gripping?
No, it was worse. That's rational. No, but I'd come. The person I came in as and the person who I left as, two different people, and the way I looked at that situation, gone. Like that shit brain was gone. It's so powerful, and that's why for me, I'm so passionate about the outdoors, because for me it was very therapeutic. But I think it can be for most people, because you go in with a heavy heart, lots on your shoulders, you leave with a lighter load.
Yeah, I definitely experienced the same thing. And I mean, in addition to getting outside and moving your body, there's something that you're engaging your senses in different ways. When you go for a hike in the forest, you smell these different smells. The temperature's different. You feel the wind. And I mean, especially when we're talking about anxiety, for example, in dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, part of how, if you're having a panic attack, you can get out of it is putting your face in ice cold water. And it's just that temperature shock is enough to help, your body change how it's acting, your thoughts. If you're freezing, you can't think very rationally about anything anymore, and it can break that loop. So even for me, that's something, I'm not a big fan of the winter, but if I'm feeling like my brain's getting stuck in those weird mental patterns, just going outside and being cold is good for my brain. Like that change. And I think the same thing happens with scent. Like I've heard same with taste, that if you're having a lot of anxiety, something like taking some lemon juice, some really sour taste can just break you out of those patterns. And I don't know how it works exactly, but that's one of the techniques that's especially taught for anxiety. And I can definitely see how being outside can do the same thing.
I think it's all a form of distracting your mind from what's currently going on and giving you anxiety.
Yeah, but you don't want to fall back into those old patterns of how you looked at the world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And you need to somehow find hope in a different perspective that just resets how you look at everything. And that's what I found that those podcasts, for example, did for me, especially with while I was walking. And then you just get caught up in everything, how beautiful it is, and you become very grateful and all that.
Oh yeah, nature's great at inspiring awe and making you kind of understand your place in the world a little better and feel more gratitude.
Yeah, and I think that feeling of being insignificant that you'll get like in sort of that grander nature, but then having a self-confidence that comes from being there and making it through, right? It's kind of like, to steal from, Bart Kwan, it's being proud but humble. Like you're having, because we having those two things going on at the same time, I think is a very healthy thing where it's hard to think your problems are the end of the world when you sort of see where you are in the world, right? Like or in the universe, where it's like, I'm just a speck. Well, my problems can't be that big. I'm a speck, right? And those types of things I find have helped me, as far as just recalibrating and realizing, like everything in life, you're not going to fix it overnight, right? So it's these accumulating a number of these little small victories, right, that then lead to new habits and behaviors and thought processes. Because if you're dealing with shitty thinking, you didn't get that overnight, right? It's just like if you're overweight, you're not going to lose the weight overnight because you didn't gain it overnight.
But those tools that you talked about, like the exercise for me, I think actually really helps me. And then the sleep, of course, you can't make any good decisions when you're not feeling well rested. But those habits are really important that help lead towards, more sustainable.
And sometimes it's
mind.
those behaviors, like whether it's exercise, like for me, everything's like sort of all connected, because if I don't get enough exercise, I can't sleep. Therefore, I don't get enough sleep, so I'm not rested. And therefore, then when you're like almost feel jet lagged from not enough sleep, you definitely don't feel like exercising in it, And when you're super tired, because I used to run into this like DJing. When you're super tired, you don't have cravings for good food, right? And when you're super tired, your judgment and willpower are compromised. So then you start eating shitty, right? For that momentary, dopamine payoff. And so it's this downward spiral of bad habits. So the same thing can happen in the other direction, though, right? And this sort of ties into sort of almost what you guys are working on, is what you want to do is like start stringing wins together instead of losses, right? So sometimes it takes willpower or sort of like that force of will to take the first step, right? And then each step kind of builds, and one of the things that I find helpful is to actually document.
But what I want to know is, what do you do specifically in the moment to help you overcome negative thinking and get you into the mood of the healthier aspects you should be doing? Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that I learned, and one of my therapists over the years said, "Hey," well, they didn't say "hey," but but if you think of it like when you're sort of having that dark, like the whole world's collapsing, go through and take a audit, right? And go, okay, just to see, like, because sometimes you feel shitty and you got a good reason, right? And then, but with depression, the problem is that you feel shitty for no reason, right? It's like you feel like somebody died when everybody's still there. And so she said, go through and do an audit of, just in the moment of your life. And then, if there is something specific, then address the specific thing. But generally, when you're feeling this, because and you can't put a pinpoint on it, it's then you're she didn't say my brain was malfunctioning, but that's my take on it. And I learned how to disassociate, right? Like internally take a step back and go, like the processor's kind of bogged up, or like almost think of it like a computer that's not working properly, because in a weird way it kind of is. And that thinking that way allowed me to just take enough of a step back from it that then it's like, oh, okay, well, if you had a leaky faucet, then you would go, oh, I have a problem I got to fix, right? And that I found was one of the most powerful things for me, and it was difficult to do initially. But sort of like with anything, with practice, you get better at it. And then it would be a thing of like, oh, okay, so food, exercise, and it would like literally be, oh, okay, and I will just go out for a walk right now. Like, and I will process it while I walk, right? Because just the active movement and get the heart rate up, and just the chemical process, the change, and then think about what's my next step as I'm doing that. So
see, for me, the act of going for a walk is a distraction for what I'm currently feeling, and it helps my anxiety because I've kind of reset what I'm thinking about, or just the environment is making me feel better, whatever. And what I found that helps me the most, I was lucky to have found it in the first place, is rock climbing, because I find that it takes my mind off of my thoughts, because it's something that's so focus intensive. Like you can't literally be thinking about all of the problems in the world when you're hanging on for dear life on these rock holds.
And basically, like, because we've talked about this before, like I equate rock climbing as the cheater's version of meditation.
Yeah,
right. You get the benefits of meditation, of being present and in the moment, and
even working out the tension in your body.
But that's I guess sort of the mental part of meditation, right? Which is to bring yourself into focus, right? And there is no past, there is no future, there is just now. I find climbing, when you're in the moment of doing it, you didn't have to sort of do any ohms or breathing, or
it's just a natural thing that happens.
You do, and guess what? Like, and the bigger thing you climb, or the scarier the thing you climb, the more in the moment you are, right?
And then for me, climbing brought me into the outdoor world, exposed me to all this other healthy benefits for your mental health.
Yeah, because basically, before you got into climbing, how active, athletic, any of that stuff were you?
Not very. I had a phase of skateboarding, which is not really comparable. I mean, you're outside, but you're usually in an urban environment. It's not a beautiful place to be. That was my primary sport before rock climbing, and then I quit that for I was afraid of getting injured from skateboarding, which is ironic because now I rock climb.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing is, it's like if you skateboard and you stick skateboarding and actually try to do anything
of significance, you're going to hurt yourself.
You're going to break bones.
That's part of the process.
Yeah. Because it's an interesting thing, because obviously with your career, like as an engineer, you run into the thing where obviously if you could go down that path, you weren't a dumb guy. And you run into that thing where a lot of times people who are, we'll call it academically oriented, don't tend to be as physical, right? And it's not that you have to be an athlete, but that physicality, I think, would benefit everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was literally all I did. I didn't do any strength training. I didn't do any running. It was literally just skateboarding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
But I think it's also the act of challenging yourself doing something that you initially couldn't.
That and gaining mastery over time. I mean, if you're getting better at something, you feel better about yourself and what you can do in the world. And I mean, that has only positive benefits as well.
Yeah. I can't say enough about that with doing hard things, whether it's backpacking, climbing a mountain, doing just rock climbing, and then it just, especially rock climbing and bouldering, going for it.
Oh, yeah.
And facing your fear.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Well, and learning to try hard. Like that's a skill unto itself.
100%.
Right? Like I know, and this is sort of where you run into, like, I know you'll run into people who are natural athletes. Oftentimes they don't get into rock climbing because it's a slow sport. Right?
Rock climbing is a slow sport?
You know, like physically. You know,
it's a slow moving sport.
Yeah, but it takes time to develop your strength, your grip strength. You don't just, it's not instant gratification,
you know,
as far as doing certain climbs, because you have to build muscles, you have to build technique.
Really? I found it to be instant gratification.
Yeah, because you're tall.
Well, you're a natural.
I'm just a natural climber, I guess.
You know, well, but I think it's one of those things because a lot of times, like, people who are natural athletes end up in things that are a little faster, right? You know, but if they try climbing, because I've had a bunch of them, you know, because I've coached a ton of people over the years and I've taken a bunch of them climbing. The ones who are the genetic freaks are just good at everything. They're like, oh, what's so hard about this climbing thing? And it's like, oh, go fuck yourself.
but climbing has such natural progression that you can witness. Like, there's literally numbers associated to how difficult you climb.
Yeah.
And you always have this new goal. And even if you get to a point where you plateau,
it's endless.
There's endless, you can take that outside and you have new routes that you want to climb.
Yeah.
It might be all at the same grade, and then that brings you outside to new environments, to new countries,
and you meet people, especially if you're climbing outside and you need a belayer.
And problem solving, so good for you. And seeing multiple ways to accomplish a climb.
You know, but it is, it's an interesting thing where so many of the downward spirals, or, like, you know, spiraling out of controls, almost just need to be broken, right? So obviously there's all sorts of coping mechanisms and skills you want to build with those things, but a lot of times it's just the physical act of doing something that breaks the chain, right? Like you were talking about sticking your face in cold water. That's kind of, you know, obviously it's a physical thing, right? Like you feel something. The going for a walk. And you're right, the distraction part of it, it's like I distract myself, which allows me to focus, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
Distract yourself to then be able to build the habits. That will.
But not only that, sometimes when you're so obsessed with something, you're like a rat on a cage, or what do they call it?
Or a hamster wheel.
A hamster.
A rat. I've never seen one of those.
A hamster on a hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And you just can't get off. And you're just and you can't even think.
You're chasing your own tail. Yeah.
You can't even think clearly.
And to some degree, you can't even think enough to get out of it. Like, I know that's something I've definitely felt.
To take a step back.
Yeah. And you can be in just such a bad mood. And it's almost like it's a comfortable place to be. And you won't even think to do something that will make you feel better. I mean, one of my therapist's suggestions to deal with that was set an alarm on your phone for the time of day that you usually kind of feel off. For me, it was the morning specifically. And if you're doing good, the alarm goes off. Okay, all good. But if you're not, it's an actual cue saying, hey, like, should you maybe do something? Like, maybe go outside, maybe go for a walk, something to kind of break that thought pattern. Because for me, without that cue, I can get totally lost in that.
You know, and I think so many of these things, like, it's behavioral, right? Because we were talking beforehand, and Eric, and you said a lot of your anxiety is a social thing, right? That, you know, and I think it's to an extent understandable, because you're going to have, like, an area you're comfortable in, right? And then, so if you're having to step outside of that, it's going to cause, you know, anxiety, right? Like fear,
in simplest terms,
yeah. And I think one of the things that I find interesting, right, is that we're all intelligent people, you know, yet these kinds of things are all, very, very common, but at the same time, they're skills that we can develop to basically both manage and then expand that circle of comfort. Because, if you stay super insulated, then the whole world gives you anxiety, right? The broader you can make that circle, then the more stuff is in the circle of comfort, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
Then less is outside, and the outside is what's scary. And so basically, I guess it just comes in as like, if you were to say, look at yourself 10 years ago, and you look at yourself now, do the same things, cause anxiety, or...
Yes, but to less of a degree.
Yeah.
Because of what, exposure?
Exposure, yes. Exposure, time.
Yeah.
Just
Facing your fears.
getting more mature.
I'd like to talk about something that I'm really passionate about is dealing with your own shit. So I believe, just because I experience it, I really think everybody else does too, whether they acknowledge it or not, that everybody's got baggage to unpack. Mm-hmm. And it all stems from their childhood, their environment, what they saw growing up. Because it wasn't until I left when I was 18 as an exchange student that I realized, holy shit, my family's fucked up in this area. They weren't entirely fucked up, okay? But there's some things that were predominant.
Yeah.
And I know that in my life, when I had a lot of issues, there were a couple times in particular I was the common denominator. Then you start to realize, holy shit, maybe it is me. And a couple key events happened to make me realize certain qualities. But nonetheless, if you don't ever deal with these items, they will just keep coming back.
Yep, and you repeat the same patterns, just different context.
Yeah, and so I think I mostly experience it at work, because that's where you spend a lot of your time. Mm-hmm. And also my personal relationships with my partner, whoever I was with, my husband at the time. And I think, I guess my public service announcement is that people need to, I think, acknowledge that you probably have something to unpack, whatever idiosyncratic, I can't say the word, whatever.
Idiosyncratic.
Yes.
Issues they may be.
Whatever issue that they're experiencing, or I think people need to acknowledge that they likely have something they need to deal with. Own it. Be aware of it. First of all, what is it? Do not know what that is.
Well, and the thing I will say, a lot of times people don't. Mm-hmm. And this is where, never have shame or any stigma about getting professional help.
100%.
So that's actually one of the ways we identified what your issue was in my counseling session. She went through a bunch of things, and whatever you don't associate shame with is actually kind of an indicator, because you don't even own it.
What you don't associate shame with?
Yeah. Yeah, so if something does not cause you, if you can't feel that feeling, say it was jealousy. I'm just throwing one out there. No, I don't know what you're talking about. You never associate with that. So that's almost a bit of an indicator, why aren't you owning that? It was really interesting.
I guess for
me, it was control.
Yeah.
I was very controlling. It was just something, and quite honestly, one of the key questions that more recently my therapist asked me maybe about 8 years ago was, what are 3 themes that you remember growing up? Okay, so for me, it was control, trust, and not being good enough. And I tell you, those are my fucking Achilles heel, right? Those were the 3 things that were dominant in my life that caused my shortcomings, right? So this is after many, many years of putting this all together, okay? Probably over 15 years. But all I'm trying to say is that I think everybody's got something to unpack. Do you know what that is? When people have marital breakdowns or relationship breakdowns, they often tend to blame the other person. Mm-hmm. I personally believe it takes 2 to dance.
Unless you do one of those funky.
That's from Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
So what do you own? And and grow from that. And I tell you, it's really hard to almost own it, but when you do and you finally get there, yeah, it's easier to manage, obviously. You become more conscious. But I think until you do that, you're going to continue experiencing issues. And you'll never understand. You'll probably blame other people. But I just think a lot of people, going back to, we talked about behaviors, but at the end of the day, you have to look at you as well. And I think that can be a cause. I'm talking about the anxiety side, what caused my anxiety.
Yeah, well, if you think, though, your issues are what cause your behaviors. Right, like it.
That's
So
right.
it's nothing lives in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So it becomes one of these cases where, and I think this is where professional help comes in, because it can be overwhelming to try to go through. Oh, and then this, and then you're just trying to process it, like, you know, try to do it on your own. This is not a DIY project, because you'll run into that thing where professionals are trained on the right kind of pathway to take you down. And you know, it'll be different for everybody, but they have sort of tools. Whereas you're trying to go unpack one thing, but you think it's this, and then it's that, and then it's right. You know, you think you maybe have a daddy issue, but it's actually from something else, and then, you know, all of then you're trying to get maybe your diet organized in this, and it's overwhelming, right? And then it causes you more anxiety. Whereas, you know, basically, whether it's a psychiatrist, a therapist, a psychologist, having them go, you know, first, hey, you're cool, right? Like there is something about having somebody who's a professional go, we can deal with this, right? It's like, no problem. It'd be one thing if you know, you had them thinking like, holy shit, I don't know.
He's a lost cause.
Yeah, but they you know, this is what they do for a living, right? So it's like, no problem, you know, like their you know, in confidence or calmness in these are the things I'm dealing with, and it's like, that's cool. Like, no, they're not so cool.
They're
but,
like
you know,
the experienced rock climber. They've been there, done that, and they can get you through it.
Yeah, and then it's one of those things where then they can in an organized manner help you develop coping mechanisms, unpack things that you didn't even know were your issues.
Totally.
And give you those coping skills.
When I realized...
and potentially medication. Like, we're not going to discount that.
Because just the feeling of... I was having an identity crisis. I actually literally did not feel comfortable in my own skin. At that time, I was a very controlling, demanding person. I had higher expectations of myself than anybody else did, but I didn't realize that. So literally, I was being told to do less. I'm like, what? But if I do less, I'll be worth less. Like, that was so hard. And until I realized what the reality was, could I get past that? But to own that, like somebody says you're controlling, or what are you talking about? But to actually then realize, you're like, holy shit, but what am I? What is normal? What is accepted? It was such an intense feeling. I didn't know what to do. So I'm just trying to explain what it might feel like, at least what it felt like to me to encounter that. It was at the same time I'm married, going through a bad time. So it was hard.
Therapy is also this place, going back to finding that self-awareness to own your shit and work through it. That, I mean, it's really this safe space where you notice things that you don't normally. Like, you could be complaining about the same thing to your friend, and it just sounds like how you usually say it. But when you have not a stranger, but someone who is that impartial party, and you're saying things, it sounds a little different. And I know for me, like, I definitely should have gone to therapy a long time ago. I put it off for so long for various reasons, some financial, some stigma, some just wanting to believe that I could get through it myself, I'm smart. I've done a lot of things. I can get through this. I don't need help. But it was just so interesting. I remember even the first day I was there, she called me out, like very gently, but saying, did you just hear like the last 5 things you said were really negative about yourself and super critical? And you kind of have this light bulb moment where you're like, oh, yeah, and that's not helpful. Oh, and she had to do that multiple times. I think she did it 5 visits before I started actually like internalizing that and realizing it really was a problem and starting to actually work to change it. But I mean, they're so good. And I mean, part of it is you need to find someone you feel comfortable with. A big part of making therapy effective is having a good therapeutic relationship, obviously.
Totally.
But when you have that, they almost can be a mirror where you can kind of see yourself more clearly.
I found it very useful. They were asking me questions that were taking me down a different journey that really opened up a whole new world that I wasn't aware of. And that was the most useful thing. And they never told me how to get there. They just asked me questions. I'm like, thank you.
Yeah, they sometimes, you know, what they might tell you is like specific coping strategies or habit, you know, like
tools.
You know, like, basically, but they, you know, that whole process of bringing things out of you, right, and getting you to confront things. It's an interesting, as somebody who is kind of fascinated, just the base idea of knowledge, right, epistemology. I found the process kind of fascinating because it would just be asking questions, right? And then with whatever I said, it led to another question, right? And it wouldn't be a thing of going, no, you're wrong, and this is what you should think, and da-da. No, they would, by asking the right questions, they would get you to go, oh, I'm full of shit, right? Like, effectively. You know, it's understanding that negative self-talk, right? They ask the questions that then it's kind of fascinating because they're asking questions, you're giving answers that leads to more questions that make you understand yourself without them going and drawing on a board. It's like, okay, and this and your mom and this and this, right?
Yeah. You come to that conclusion yourself.
You start to understand yourself without anybody specifically pointing it out to you.
It's the most powerful thing.
You know? And so that kind of, you start to learn what you believe because you've had to sort of explain it because they've asked enough questions, right? And then, you know, you start to understand, oh, that might not be the, and, you know, you go down this pathway.
Well, isn't understanding, whether it be why somebody else did what they did, like the idea of seeking to understand them, seeking to understand yourself, whether it's mentally, like, what the fuck am I thinking? Like, you know, what you just explained, to seeking to understand your reaction to food, or, you know, isn't that critical in all of this?
But that's what the therapy tends to do.
Yeah.
And
taking that time to step back, reflect. They say journal. You don't understand. It may not make sense to you, but write it down. Like, things will come.
Yeah, like it's funny. Like, you know, in a few weeks I'm going to turn 49, and it took a long time to get here, and I have my ups and downs, but. And this is something I would wish on anybody, not sort of what I've gone through, but I'm enjoying both my life and who I am more now than at any point in my life, right? So it's one of those things, like that idea that instead of like after 30 it's all downhill or whatever, you know, that thing of like, no, you can keep growing and keep learning and adding, and, you know, some of the things that we would associate with aging, like my absolute athletic potential isn't as high as it was 20 years ago. But the just saw through like the whole of my life as all the pieces work together is better now than it's ever been, right? So yeah, I'm giving up a little bit on the athletic side, but my emotional well-being, my intellect, my dealing with, bad thinking and biases, and even just down to the thing, I like myself more now than I did at earlier points in my life. So regardless of where you are, age-wise or anything like that, like you can keep getting better.
By growing.
Yeah. Well, but this is what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
I think some people just run into, well, this is my life, right? And it doesn't have to be.
No, it doesn't.
Here's a question. In an earlier stage of your life, whenever it happened to be, did you think a therapist would help you? Were you open-minded to believe that this person would help you?
Well, early enough, I didn't even know it was a thing. And then, so basically, I would say at a certain point, I didn't even know it existed. Then I didn't know how you were going to help me. Then it was like, fuck it, I might as well try because my life, I wouldn't
So
want to.
the stage between I don't think it's going to work and fuck it, I might as well try, was there a span in between?
Probably about 6 months, right? Sort of that becoming aware, and but then it's one of those things where I never heard something like this at the time. This was all before podcasts, but I'd talked to a couple of I became aware of it in conversations with people. And there was probably a little bit of an initial thing because, I'm like a young male. I should be able to do... and I was pretty good about the physical part of looking after myself. I was training. I'm pretty strong, all that kind of thing. And so there was a little bit of the thing of like, listen, if I can look after my body, I can look after my brain. And then... but the good part, if you want to call it, is that... And it was almost I gave myself a cheat mentally that allowed me to put the ego aside. Is when I was younger, I had a bunch of concussions, which then let me go, oh, it's not that I can't, it's that something's broken. So it's not that I'm too weak. Right? Which gave me the out to actually get help.
Because that's almost the...
Because if I'd broken my arm, I wouldn't have an issue getting a cast. Yep. Right? And because, I'd taken a bunch of blows to the head.
It sounds like it was an excuse almost.
Yeah. I gave myself the excuse to get help.
Because that's a very negative feeling I think men in particular don't want to associate with, is feeling weak.
Yeah. Especially
whereas for women, it would be, what is it? Being feminine. Or maybe that's... Anyways, but I know for guys that is really sensitive. A lot of guys don't ever want to admit any kind of lack of strength, whether it's mental or, that's just... Isn't that what they're here for? They're here to emulate that. Yeah. So I think overall, what I'm trying to say, that I think this is a hard topic for guys in particular.
Yeah, whereas...
To get help and seek help and admit to, I need help.
Yeah, so it's a thing of just thinking, nobody would bat an eyelash if you broke an arm, right? There's no sign of weakness to go get a cast. Well, it worked for me to give myself permission to get help because I just went, my head's broken.
So what are some signs? They say signs of women in depression and in men are different. I've heard that in men it can be more things like aggression versus feeling sad.
Oh, that would explain a lot of my youth.
But do you know a little bit more about that? I know that's one sign, for example.
Well, but I don't think the aggression is the outward sign, right? Because feeling sad, we're not given the tools on how to express that.
Right.
And then because you're frustrated and it's easier to punch things, then so the aggression is what other people see.
Or maybe irritability and
yeah, like but you know, and it'll vary for everybody, because I can only speak for myself.
right.
Not liking your lot in the world, right? And sort of self-hatred and because you can't get a handle on it, but I'm also young and with like a ton of energy. There was definitely a lot of aggression. And it didn't help that getting in fights, because it turned out like maybe it was distracting and it was physical and it was all these different things we've talked about. And I was pretty good at it. So then you would get this positive feedback.
Reinforcement.
Right. So, you know, I apologize to anybody who I headbutted in the face or, you know, any of those things when I was younger. Because it's that kind of thing where if you're fighting, you know, because if you've ever actually been in a real fight, there's no distinction from that to fighting for your life, like the way your brain processes it. And it's easy to not be sad if you're fighting for your life, right? And that's sort of one of the things that sort of led into martial arts for me, because it was this outlet that you could exercise it. And this is stuff where it wasn't like I planned it. It was like more just that dumb guy thing of I do this and I'm cool and I feel good, right?
And I might get laid.
Well, not the martial arts thing. That's later. You know, but it's those things where because you don't have a vocabulary to express these things, some things would be healthy outlets, and then others would be negative outlets. And just like you know, you get that dopamine from eating the bad food. You know, and that's where something like counseling or therapy can come in. You know, if you were sort of experiencing those types of things, right? Because and with guys, you'll there's sort of, or I shouldn't say guys, just me. There were sort of two things. There would be either I would disappear, like physically, I would, you know, like I would either disappear off into the woods by myself, or I would sequester myself in my room, right? Like you would isolate yourself, or you know, there would be this boisterous physicality, and then you know, you'd basically try to find these different outlets, these little glimpses of brightness that sort of kept you going. So for me, it was like almost this pendulum swing of isolation and then both positive and negative physicality, right? Because I discovered sports and I would get those little, you know, it's also where my concussions came from, because when you played football, wrestled, and then played rugby, no young man or woman should probably do all three, like one season right after the other, because your head gets fucked up. Even if you don't, you know, we didn't know back then what we know about traumatic brain injury. And, you know, that definitely for me was both an outlet, but it probably didn't help the long-term brain, because, you know, NFL players, you know, they retire and the suicide rate among them and depression is ridiculously high. And all of the ones when they're autopsied have, or like I think it's like 95% or something like that, have all the signs of like terrible traumatic brain injuries. You know, because it's cumulative.
It's interesting. I know somebody who slipped and hit their head on a hot tub, and they experienced had a major traumatic head injury that they couldn't for about a year get back on their feet, and they experience so bad depression, so much
Yep.
terrible depression. It's interesting because I don't think people are as aware of that,
Yeah. And
for sure.
guys tend to be, because we're more boisterous.
Yeah.
More depression, because there's sort of like the wiring and chemical depression, right? You know, and that can happen to anybody. You know, but it's such a complex topic. It's like, for me, because I don't know where the chicken and the egg was.
Gotcha.
Right. You know, because I remember like a childhood that wasn't great, but there was parts that were okay. And, you know, because it's hard to, looking back, I know a lot of it was not categorized as healthy with my family. But then you run into the thing where, you know, I remember as a kid, like jumping my bike across, you know, the creek and, and actually this is a thing where I don't remember it. I remember all the stories people told me afterwards, which I painted in my own memories, because I went to the hospital with like a concussion, and I spent 3 days in the hospital. And I couldn't, like every 5 minutes I was asking what time it was. Right? Like that was sort of the first official, you know, but there was all sorts of falling out of trees and all that shit too. So who knows how much of what I experience now and have experienced during my life is almost self-administered from having my brain bounced around inside my head so many times.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, it's funny because I told when we started this episode, like beforehand, you know, there was sort of discussion about, you know, and it's like, my thing is like, I'm just going to let it flow. It's just, you know, and it's like, didn't even consider talking about traumatic brain injuries and how they relate to depression, even though I am probably the poster child for said thing. I had an epiphany today. Like, I never actually associated the two.
Interesting.
That's cool. That's cool. That was live.
Yeah. So you guys are the first people to hear it. You know, so it's a thing. Like, I'm very optimistic because one of the things actually I didn't end up talking about, because we're sort of reaching the end. We're like over an hour and a half now. But one of the other things, and this has been one of the biggest things for me, is find a purpose. Find
100%.
a purpose or a meaning. Do something meaningful.
What's the same thing? Like
Something you enjoy.
Well, and it's sort of beyond, not just enjoy, because there's sort of a lot of transient things I enjoy, but find a thing that engages you, that you feel like, you know, like it enlights a passion in you, because and something in, you know, you found something that sort of touches that part of you when you almost are a little bit obsessive, right? But it gives you that feeling like I'm doing something worthwhile, not just for me, but and it's sort of part of what I feel about doing like this whole project, the podcast and the website and all those things, because every time I talk to somebody, like, there is a transformative power to the melange that I'm into, right? Because it's exercise, it's the outdoors, it's adventures, it's connections, right? It's not like go for your backpack and it fixes everything. It doesn't, but it's like all of these things kind of work together, right? To basically make people, like, give people the tools to make their lives better,
More fulfilling.
right? And because, you know, very like teaching survival classes or camping classes or guiding trips or all the different things I've done over the years, I've seen that power it has in people, right? To my God, like, it brings them alive. And it's the same thing with like exercise, right? You get people on a path and give them the tools and you see it change them. And right, maybe it's they feel a little better, or they look a little better, and then it fuels, and then it becomes one of these things. It's almost like dropping a pebble in a still pond, right? These ripples flow out because, the things you learn in the weight room, right? Like of working hard and consistency and all that kind of thing, you carry into the rest of your life.
Yep.
Same thing with, the outdoor adventures. And basically because of all of that, I, seeing people kind of activate and come alive, then that gives me kind of that purpose to, even when I'm, sort of at down times, because I still run into them, I'll go through my self-care checklist and do the things I need to do. But it's the fact that I can make a difference in my little way then sometimes keeps me moving forward.
I recently on Facebook put out my other PSA about live your passion. And people say it all the time. Mm-hmm. Do what you love. But I think what's different here is I was looking to potentially do something different in my career, right? What is that? Can't believe I'm saying this on air. And that's a fear. Anyway, but just doing something different, adding some more. And all I knew is that after thinking about it for quite some time, I could not do something related to adventure and this, right? And so in this little Facebook message or post, I put all the things that I got out of it, or what I expected to get out of it, and then what I didn't expect. And honestly, doing what you love, even if you're trying to make a big change, right? I knew that, just do what you love. You start to build skills. You start to meet people. But your life just becomes so much more vibrant. Mm-hmm. It's so good for the soul, doing what you love. You're creative. That's the whole process of collaborating.
Oh, yeah. But
you're building on your strengths, right? And for me, it's engaging with others, hearing their story, connecting with others who are passionate. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing better than that. And then I'm curious, okay, what's your message? Tell me more. Right? Like, this is what I love. Like, let's get it out there. And it's been so rewarding. Plus, as I've mentioned, you've built some skills and you start to realize, shit, I like this area. Mm-hmm. And then take that back to your professional life, and it helps that. And you come to work and you're, and to be clear, what I do in my work is a lot of fun. I was just looking for something more, right? So I come to work even with that extra kick in my shoes, my feet, whatever, I'm that hop in my step. And you've got this energy, right? But at the end of the day, honestly, when I looked at what do I do next, and I was describing to my friend who's a life coach to help me figure this out, I just asked her, she was just asking me questions. She said, who's Catherine? The number one thing I said to her was adventurous. Mm. No, I've never, if you compare me to Winston and everything he's done, his whole resume, it's not the same, but I've always had that spirit.
Yeah, but
always.
Now you've hit on something that's really important. If you want to have self-worth, never compare yourself to anybody else.
Yep.
Compare yourself to what you used to be. Mm-hmm. Right? Because and this is something that I discovered years ago, like just athletically. It's like I've trained for years, and then I find like somebody, I've been training, but I'm also a coach. Like Miriam Brower's like sort of the perfect example, right? Because she started training with me because her boyfriend, now husband, trained with me. So it was just like, it's like she was 17 or 18, just starting university. In her mind, a little pudgy. I just want to be in a little better shape. Well, I train everybody the same, not the same level or anything, but, I have the same process. So I do a fitness test, and it's like, and this is cycling. And so she's riding a hybrid bike, and it's got like a big poofy seat on it, but I put a power meter on her bike and heart rate monitor, and, it's a little lab I got set up. And it's like, she's never really done any of this shit before, but there's a bit of try hard in her, farm girl. And it's like, oh, well, you did really good. Like, you know, da 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 da. It's like basically sort of in an untrained state with no real background is stronger than a lot of the guys I've been coaching for months or years. You know, and subsequently, like, she now is, aside from like still in university, I think she's working in her master's, been the Ontario champion. I think she's won the Canadian championship. She races professionally, you know, Pan Am Games, right? You know, and it's the thing. It's like she started in the back of my bike shop, and I claim no great credit for where she's gone. You know, she's had different coaches and things since, because she's like, you know, the hard work part of it, like that's her. But she also like should thank her parents, because she was just a genetic wonder, you know, and Mark, her boyfriend, like I always joked, if they have kids, I get to coach them because, you know, it's one of those things, the genetics. So it's that idea, like when you are dealing with, you know, comparisons, you can be proud of your accomplishments if you compare to yourself, but you're going to have people like the Michael Jordans of the world who, yeah, it doesn't matter what you do. You're never going to be like even in the same stratosphere as them. Like you're not the same species, right? So if you compare to others, you're just setting yourself up to be miserable.
Fair enough. I think for me, what's really cool though is that going back to the adventure, when I think of Catherine, I think of adventure. I'm actually going back to my inner child. Like, because as a kid, I was super adventurous, you know, like I was like Miss Indiana Jones-esque, you know, and wanting to be, you know, an explorer. And then when I was an exchange student, like when I was in high school, I sought to be an exchange. I did everything independent. I wanted to explore the world. Mm-hmm. And so I really just returned back to my roots of what I loved. And I think that because as we grow, society, you know, pressures and changes and expectations, you go into become a person maybe you're not really meant to be or you want to be. So I think that's been the best lesson for me, was just go back to what I loved and live in your truth, essentially. And so that's what I'm trying to do, because I said earlier, one of my weaknesses is trying to please others, not being good enough. So obviously doing this podcast was a complete fear, and saying the things that I have is very difficult, but I'm saying, fuck it. This is who I am. And it's actually paying off. Like it's in ways that are beyond happiness and it's satisfaction. And it's just, yeah, it's amazing.
Well, and I think one of the things
wait. Without expectation. How's that?
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
You just do what you love.
Get outside.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's quickly sum this up. So a couple of tips for managing anxiety.
Couple of tips. Breathing, changing your state. That could be getting outside. That could be putting your head in cold water. That could be smells, tastes, whatever it is. Those are helpful for anxiety, especially in the moment.
Cool. And Eric, what have you found that has helped you with the social anxiety?
Exposure and time.
Yeah, exposure therapy.
Yeah.
You know, because that's, and I think it's sort of you hit on though is voluntarily, right?
Yes, you have to make a conscious decision to put yourself out there.
Yeah,
and then you can have the reward that you did this and you succeeded.
Yeah, because that, and it's funny, like voluntarily confronting your fears gradually gets you over them, or it makes them manageable. Mm-hmm. Having thrown in the deep end without consent, in a sense, we'll call that fear rape, because consent was withheld. Actually, is what is PTSD. Yeah. So people, if you want to help people, encourage them to take the steps, you know, and confront their fears, and you know, don't throw them in the deep water. So we're just saying,
with something that is the smallest possible step. And I would say the same thing, just general anxiety, or if you're depressed, look for the smallest, most easiest, manageable thing that you can do to take a step forward. Don't go into the deep end. Don't even go to the middle. Like, what's the thing that you almost feel like isn't worth doing because it seems too easy?
Consciously slow down your breathing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take any effort to do that. Just, you're like, slow it down, right? Because if you control your breathing, you control your parasympathetic nervous system. That's kind of magic, right? Just redo the part that can't think. You can control it.
And ideally practice it before you need to use it.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're panicking, like, you can't think to use these tools. It feels weird to practice them when you're not having anxiety. It's hard. You want to be lazy and not do it. But it really helps to have those patterns ingrained before you need them.
And Catherine, a couple tips from you?
When confronted with fear, like a climb or anything, just fake it till you make it. That's how I approach hard climbs. Like, I'm a kid at a playground, and it works. And burning off the energy to, put yourself in a different scenario, situation, burn it off, and you always come out feeling much better, always.
Yeah, and
then just lastly, just being super aware of looking at inwards. Look at yourself.
And a couple things I would say. Number one, look after your body, both nutritionally and exercise-wise, and that will do a lot to help your brain. And then don't be afraid to seek help. You get a mechanic for your car. You got a thing.
Yeah, no, that triggered a thought for me is don't be afraid to even if you're not going to go see a therapist, don't be afraid to tell your friends, your family, how you're actually feeling and what you're struggling with. Because that was a big part for me, keeping it inside, keeping it to myself, wanting to seem like, no, I'm okay, it's fine, I don't want to put pressure on everyone, and being frankly afraid of how people would react and what people would think of me because I'm struggling mentally. But I have to say, even like part of my story, which we talked about in the last episode, was saying on social media, posting a video telling how much I'm struggling, or posting a long form text saying how much I was struggling. And it's terrifying, especially when you're putting it out on social media. These aren't just people who know you directly. Like, they definitely can judge you. But overwhelmingly, I have not had anyone react negative. And instead, I've heard stories from people I would not expect, how they're dealing with the same things, and how hearing that you're struggling makes them feel less alone in their struggles. Mm-hmm. And I mean, for me, like, that really kicked off kind of getting my mental health and dealing with my anxiety and finding purpose. I mean, in making those videos and hearing that both people you know and don't know feel less alone, they feel less like a freak, they feel less broken and a little more normal and more willing to go get help. Like, that gave me meaning like nothing else. So, I mean, certainly if you need help, like, don't be afraid to go to therapists. I didn't forever. And as soon as my first session was done, I had that feeling like, really? I should have done this a while ago. But I mean, even as far as telling the people around you, whoever you're comfortable with, how you're feeling and how you're really feeling, you'd be shocked and surprised in the best possible way of the response people will give you. And certainly everyone can understand those feelings to some degree. So just be open about it. And I mean, that's part of how we reduce the stigma too, right? Like, you need to hear that both the people you expect maybe to be struggling, but also the people who you expect to be these rocks, these people who just accomplish things and seem so tough, guaranteed they're under the same kind of pressures. At least at some point they've felt some little bit. And I mean, if you can be that for other people, I mean, if you don't know where to start, there's one place. Telling your story, telling how you're feeling, and just seeing what happens. And from my experiences, I mean, nothing bad has come from it. And it really kind of set me on this path of feeling like I knew who I was again and that I have a purpose in life.
Good. Fundamentally is the thing of one of the biggest things for your mental health is to tell the truth and be who you are. If you have to live a lie, right? If you can't admit what you are, who you are, what you like, right? I'm going to use sort of a not totally applicable analogy, but it's one that people would make sense, right? Or hopefully make sense. Like, imagine you live in a totalitarian country, right? Where you can't tell the truth because telling the truth will get you killed. Take a North Korea. That warps a person, right? If you have to lie about who you are, what you're into, what you like, whatever, like basically that changes your brain, and not for the positive. So it's one of those things, whether it's telling the truth about how you feel. If somebody asks you, now, if it's somebody in a store, oh, how's your day? It's sort of that judging the appropriateness of,
absolutely.
Because, I work retail and there's, when I say, sometimes, hi, how is it going today? Most people get it and they go, oh, not too bad. How was your day? Right? This is social niceties. I have had a few people TMI me, and it's like, I'm not equipped to help you with that. Sorry. But the people in your life, like you were talking about, it is tell the truth, figure out who you are. Right. And because one of the things, you might not know exactly what your truth is, but when you're lying.
Yep.
Right. And that makes such a difference in who you are, right? Because it's hard to figure out exactly what you are and who you are and what you love and all that kind of thing if the things you're presenting to the world are a lie, right? And that is brutally hard, but it's better than the alternative. Right? Because the alternative of lying about who you are and what you are and, corrupts you. So, on that bright note, but it's the thing. It's like, it is kind of bright. Like, just the fact that, it will set you free, the truth. Or, as close as you can get to it.
And we need to be accepting of everybody's truth.
Yeah. And it's one of those things is that you don't have to agree with somebody, right? Because, hey, there's a whole bunch of terrible, kind of opinions and views out there. But it's one of those things of being able to then at least have a conversation with people. And yeah. So.
Wow.
I think
Great
that was
conversation.
I think so. Yeah. So until next time.
I'm Catherine.
I'm Winston.
I'm Alyssa.
I'm Eric.
And did you say work hard?
And work hard.
And play dirty.
Bye.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever.